Writing is my favorite thing to do.
Have you heard about the Gateway to Publishing Conference and Convention? They'll have writing workshops, writing classes, and more. June 16th through 18th, 2017 at the Renaissance Airport Hotel in St. Louis, Missouri.
Cool! Where can I sign up?
Go right now to www.stlwritersguild.org and click on GatewayCon.
www.stlwritersguild.org and click on GatewayCon?
That's right. See you there.
Right Pack Radio, a podcast produced by Winding Trails Media, for writers, by writers.
Writers, agents, and publishers, for the first time since the Gutenberg Press, find themselves lost in a maze of mystery as technology alters the shape of the publishing industry. Searching for Answers is a group of writers throwing pop culture, writing, and publishing into a crucible of clarity, passion, and humor. This group is the Right Pack.
Welcome back to Right Pack Radio. This is your host and producer, David Allen Lucas, author of Crazy Stuff. Actually, I've got a novel. I'm happy to announce that it's nowhere near done, but the concept draft is done, which that's the part that's going to be tossed completely in the trash, and I'm working on the rewrites. So, with that, hopefully it will be ready by September. And with me today is my lovely co-host.
I'm Kathleen Kayembe. I write romance with the pen name Kaseka and Vita, and under my own name, I have a short story coming out in Nightmare Magazine in March. It is called You Will Always Have Family, a Triptych. I hope you'll check it out.
Excellent. Also with us is
Chanel Etienne. I write science fiction and fantasy.
Melanie Lucas. I have actually been writing just a little bit of fantasy this week, so that makes me feel good.
She's starting to get back into it.
Fedora Amos, and I want to tell everybody that I've had an absolutely wonderful weekend. Last night, of course, that was actually February 4th, for whenever this actually comes out, I spoke to the Sherlockians. And there are 5 groups of Sherlockians, people who love Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes. It was great. And then this morning came out in the Post-Dispatch newspaper a new article about Jack the Ripper. And of course, I wrote Jack the Ripper in St. Louis.
Yeah.
And the essence of this story was that there is more evidence now that Francis J. Tumblety was the real Jack the Ripper, and he died in St. Louis in 1903, and that's why I wrote Jack the Ripper, and why I had a great weekend. I also am president of Greater St. Louis Sisters in Crime, and I have a new book out, which is Mayhem at Buffalo Bill's Wild West.
Hey, you should actually bring back Jack the Ripper in St. Louis and say, hey, look, find out more about it.
I want to come back.
I can't saw it, I really do.
There's nothing wrong with a new afterword.
But before you do, go ahead, George, and then I'm coming back to you.
Hi, I'm George Soroy. I am the vice president of the Missouri Writers Guild. I look forward to seeing you at the annual conference, May 5th through the 7th at the Holiday Inn Executive Center in Columbia, Missouri. And I am also an author of science fiction for the young adult reader. Both Excelsior and Ever Upward, Part 2 of the Excelsior Journey, are finished, and with my publisher, they are expected to be out into the world on May 1st and June 1st of 2017. All 5 parts of my serial from Parts Unknown will also be relaunched later this year.
And with that, also, if you can't make the Missouri Writers Conference, don't forget in June 16th, 17th, and 18th at the Renaissance Hotel in St. Louis is GatewayCon, Gateway to Publishing Writers Conference and Readers Convention.
No reason you can't do both.
Yeah, you can do both, definitely. Going back, though, I want to ask, did you say a new article came out about Jack the Ripper?
Yes.
Where at?
It was in today's Post-Dispatch.
I'm getting that out of the recycling. I need to read this.
It is. It's by some fellow in Fenton who found some evidence in New Orleans because Francis J. Tumblety, the real Jack the Ripper, also spent a lot of time in New Orleans. And so this is more evidence in favor of his being the real Jack the Ripper. Yay!
Hey. Well, and just for the audience, she says the real Jack the Ripper. Remember, there's lots of theories, and I know that I don't want to...
And they're all wrong. Excuse me, they're all wrong.
See, I just put it out there. It is Fedora's position that he was the right Jack the Ripper, and there's also other people who agree with her. So, anyway, with that. I just didn't want you strangling yourself. Like, what was the author? Patricia
Cornwell.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
she's wrong too.
And you see why I'm defending Fedora briefly. Just legal
Patricia, if you're listening, you're wrong.
Yes.
No man, even though it not be written down, just remember you're wrong. Anyway, we're not here to talk about Jack the Ripper, but I probably will be bending Fedora's ear over the next couple of weeks after I read the article, because of my love of crime and reading about crime and understanding crime. But today we are going to talk about narrative hooks. So we're going to hook you right into this. Yes, I know what I did there.
We all heard that.
Yeah, sorry, bad puns. Narrative hooks. Why are they important? How do you use them? Are they just for the opening of the story? What keeps you hooked as a reader? What keeps you hooked as an author? We're all kinds of hooked here.
What is a hook?
Well,
What is a narrative hook?
It is not. It is obviously, but it's a narrative hook, because I was about to say it's not Dustin Hoffman in the movie Hook as Captain Hook. It is what grabs the reader. It's to borrow a metaphor. It is a little fishing hook you dangle into the river for the reader, who's the fish, to come by and grab it, and you can yank them into your story.
So it's kind of an entrance to the immersion experience for your reader.
It is. It is what gets them interested in the story. Is what keeps them interested from chapter to chapter. And I'm being purposeful when I say that. It's not just the inciting incident, which, by the way, that is a part of a narrative hook. It is the beginning of every story. It's the beginning of every chapter, the end of every chapter, the cliffhanger, so forth.
Let's start with why people choose books in a bookstore, and there's been quite a bit of research about this actually. Mm-hmm. And the gist of it is this: the first thing they do is look at the back cover. Mm-hmm. And if they like the promo that's on the back cover, then they will open the book and look at the first page. And if they like the first sentence, they'll read the first paragraph, maybe the first two. If they like the first two paragraphs, they will skim through that page and the next, and that's the point when they decide to buy the book or put it back on the shelf. So you see that you have some break points here, and you have to hook people at every single one. And the question is, how do you do it?
Yes. Well, let's go with that, but before we do, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say you start in the middle of things, in media res. You start as close to the action as possible, so the reader isn't bogged down at the very beginning with, tons and tons of backstory and exposition and stuff that doesn't really show conflict or tension. So you want to start right before things are going to happen, and let things happen immediately.
You also want to start while things are happening. One of the most famous examples that you'll see in any form of storytelling is the very first 30 seconds of the original Star Wars. Mm-hmm. Because if you basically just, if George Lucas went ahead and just panned down and showed Luke Skywalker hanging out at Tashi Station, to get some power converters, and winds up hanging out with his buddies and everything, and that's what we see to start things off, then you have about 5 to 10 minutes or so until things really start picking up, and people could very likely be checking out almost immediately. But if you start above planet Tatooine and you see this tiny rebel blockade runner racing through the stars, and it's being pursued by the biggest friggin' Star Destroyer that you've ever seen, as the rumbling and everything is just filling your ears, all of a sudden you're invested, because all of a sudden it really just kind of grabs you right at the start. You are officially hooked on that first 30-second mark.
And I just want to say real quick, I'm trying to remember how the novel version of Star Wars actually got started.
It started the way
you just did.
Yeah.
But the radio drama starts off with Luke Skywalker listening to a recruitment tape to go to the Imperial Academy. It does not start off with the rebel blockade runner, and it's kind of a slower start.
But at the same time, like, what can you say? It's just like if you're doing a radio drama, you can't just say, have the sound of engines and just going like Rebel Blockade Runner, Rebel Blockade Runner. You can't say that. You have to go with the medium that you're working with.
Empire Strikes Back as a radio drama, I'll get you. However, did do something more similar to that. If you remember the movie Empire Strikes Back, we begin with seeing all these Star Destroyers, and then suddenly these rockets are launching from them. We know they're probe droids. But when you first are seeing this for your first time, you don't know what the heck's being launched.
Yeah.
And you follow one down to the planet Hoth and so forth. In the radio drama, instead, what he did, and this was Brian Daley, who is the author, that worked with George Lucas on this, or worked with Lucasfilms. They start off with a rebel convoy that is going and has a bunch of fighters that are protecting it, and suddenly here comes a Star Destroyer, pops in, TIE fighters are coming out, and you have got this massacre of a rebel convoy. Then it shifts over. So it's much more starting to know the action. Go ahead.
Well, I have a quote that I want to read, but before that, I have a sassy face that I want to address. Miss Chanel Etienne.
Ooh, we have sassy faces.
When I mentioned starting in the middle of things, you got a look on your face that said you disagreed. I want to hear this. That's what we're talking for.
Dun, 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 dun,
She's making more faces, guys.
Well, the reason that I'm not quite as happily on the start in the middle of things train here. Some of the books that I'm reading right now, and the argument that they're presenting is that there has to be a sort of, for lack of a better word, a backstory, sort of a basis on which the narrative has to unfold and basically give itself the impetus to continue. And without that I feel like sometimes if you're coming in the middle of things, you don't really have the opportunity to have that backstory isn't really as great. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, it does.
So that's the only reason I'm sitting here making squinty faces at you, is because I'm in my mind I'm trying to work out the way that you could start things in the middle and hook your reader in by putting them right into that action, but still have the opportunity for like any sort of emotional backstory or character arc going on there.
And I'm glad you brought that, because you have just brought up the entire argument that occurs out there, the entire debate of prologue versus no prologue. And prologues, I'm not just stating my opinion on this, the industry is basically right now saying don't do a prologue. I don't say that's accurate. I say it depends on the book. The prologues should be rare. One of the things which I would point out, and starting off in the middle of things, and believe it or not, I'm not even going to talk about Star Wars. Miracle.
Is it Star Trek?
No, it's not even Star Trek. It's actually a novella called Ethan Frome.
Oh, I thought it was going to be Babylon 5.
If Ethan Frome has a lot of backstory in it. But what he does with, and I'm trying to remember the author whose name just went right out my door. But hey, you guys,
Edith Wharton, I think.
It could be. You guys can take a look at it. You got Google available to you. It's a lot of symbolism of the starkness and the winter, but it works as like an onion. It slowly peels away the story, and the backstory is in that onion. So it slowly introduces the backstory as we're reading the book, novella. And that's one of the ways to really get into the backstory without boring the reader right off the bat. Not to mention another book that Johnny Tremaine, that was entire backstory, as far as I was concerned, up until the last 2 chapters. It would put me to sleep every paragraph until the last 2 chapters. And the only reason I had to read it was for school.
You definitely don't want to start off your story with a great amount of info dump.
Yeah.
I made that mistake when I was writing the first draft of Excelsior, And I think I must have written about maybe 2.5 pages worth to kind of thinking that I was doing my reader a favor by getting them into the right mindset, when at the same time, after everything was done, my editor basically just let me know that all of that could be cut, and then we can go ahead and take what was there and weave it in. And all of a sudden now we were able to make that into dialogue, make it into a part of the overall story. And it made everything so much richer, and it made it a lot more fun, because you get to have this backstory going on that's not coming from this omnipotent point of view, but it's coming from the point of view of the characters that you're going to be following. So everyone's going to have their own little interpretation, and that's what makes it a lot of fun to be able to play with backstory and use that to kind of, in its own way, kind of hook the reader into wanting more. And yes, you were right, Fedora, you were right, it was Edith Wharton. So
Excellent. Since you're mentioning that, I do want to mention two things. One, I wish Jen was here because she'd correct me on the proper term that she uses, but I think it's called the info couch or dump couch.
Info dump?
Info dump, but
Plot couch.
the plot
Plot
couch. Avoid that.
Or
If you're going to do
we have
back
a case of the plots.
in case of
yeah,
if you want to,
Exposition couch.
Yes.
That's what
there it is,
Exposition
exposition
couch.
couch. Yeah,
where she talked about, thank you, a story she had read where every time there was going to be some backstory, they went and sat on a couch and talked. And that's where she picked it up from.
great.
So definitely you want to be able to interweave your backstory into it, because you want to keep the excitement going right off the bat, and you want to have the human touch or the character interest. Number two, I'm glad you said something here, George, because you remind me to say this. When we're talking about hooking your readers, guys, this is for your rewrites. If you can do it on your first draft, fantastic, good for you. Let your first draft be a mess. Let it be a junk. Worry about it on your rewrites. This is where that comes into play. Don't be stressful and be a perfectionist.
Yes,
Because
the first
perfectionists don't pull it off.
exactly. The first draft is yours, but the drafts that come after is theirs.
Yep.
So
Well, I wanted to read you guys a little something from How to Write a Damn Good Novel 2 by James N. Frey.
Cool.
It's about suspense. And he says, freezing the quivering and helpless reader to the book is what a novelist lives for. To do that, the novelist tries to make his or her readers worry and wonder about characters. Worrying and wondering is another way of saying the reader is being held in suspense. Webster's defines suspense as the state of being undecided or undetermined. What is undecided or undetermined is a story question.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I think we've been dancing around. He says a story question is a device to make the reader curious. There are statements that require further explanation, problems that require resolution, forecasts of crises, and the like.
Yep.
So,
It should be a story-worthy problem, to borrow a term from the book Hooked by Les Edgerton.
Les Edgerton. Yeah.
Thank you. I did pronounce it right.
so
Very cool.
even if you're not starting in the middle of things initially,
Mm-hmm.
as long as you give the reader a story question to wonder about, you have done your job.
Right.
So, I'll give you an example because he gives a lot of first lines in this chapter to tell you what the story questions are. And the first line is supposed to hook the reader. So here's one example that's doesn't seem high stakes, except it does. Linus met his new stepmother for the first time on Christmas Eve. That's not like nobody's exploding, nobody's dying, but it does beg the question, will Linus like his new stepmother? Like, that's
what
a
happened to
decent...
the first mother?
Like, it makes you wonder about what's going on in that world, and it makes you wonder what is going to happen when this meeting happens, because you know it's going to happen.
Also, who introduces new people to your family on Christmas Eve? Come on.
Exactly.
Well, and why is he meeting his stepmother? Why hasn't he met this woman before she became the stepmother?
Right.
And see, we just generated a bunch of story questions from that one single sentence.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of times I've seen writers, especially new writers, start off with, in medias res, in the middle of action, must mean I must have a fight scene happening, a battle scene. Or I must be having a murder right that second. You know, you haven't had a chance to invest in the characters yet. Yep, and it not saying you can't do that, because you can. There have been very successful books that have done this, but you've got to be able to invest in the characters. You've got, and before you really, and that's not, I'm not saying what I want to say. So let's scratch what I just said about investing in the character. You've got to be able to raise the curiosity of the reader. I will say, and I could be wrong, and won't be the first time, won't be my last.
Oh my gosh, why?
But I will say
Okay, fine.
that humanity.
Wait, you're wrong.
Hush,
Oh, sorry.
hush. Humanity is the most curious of species, right before the cat. You know, if you ever watch a cat, how curious they get, we're even worse. So, with that, I think, Fedora, did you have your hand?
Well, I would just make a suggestion that one trope that is used and has been forever in any kind of fiction is the secret.
Yes.
And that is a good hook. You have to have some way of letting the reader know that there is a secret, but not telling them what it is. So it's not what you tell the reader half so much as what you lead them to want to know and their imagination to get to work on it.
Right.
That's also also a good way to play on what former DC Comics editor Jeanette Kahn once said, that their whole business in comics and everything, and this goes in all forms of storytelling, is to torture your readers. And the best way to torture your readers is to torture your characters. And that goes into all different walks of life. It could be withholding a secret, or it could be stretching them out on a very painful device. You know, it's up to you. It's how you want to tell whatever story you want to tell, but at the same time, you have to keep your reader on the hook to want them to keep going to see where this particular story goes.
So the issue of hope is what you're hoping for
Yeah.
there, as in you're wondering how this character is going to get out of this terrible situation.
Exactly, because yes, they're being tortured, they're being stretched out and everything, but they are still alive. And if they're still alive, that means that there is that hope. And then it's, just depends on whether that's going to come from the character themselves or whether it's going to come from some outside force or whatever. That's up to you, the writer.
So then the story question in that case is, will they live?
Yeah.
Will they escape?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. And I'm going to use, instead of story question, which is a good phrase, I'm going to change it just a little bit. And I'm borrowing this again from Hook. Story-worthy problem. You may not have, in the inciting incident, the main problem. You may not show it right off the bat. But it's something enough. They've got to resolve the initial situation, then explode into the, puns intended, explode into the main problem, whatever that is.
Well, take romance, for example. There is always the same question.
Yeah.
Are these two unlikely characters going to get together?
Yes.
And if so, how will it be? Will it be explosive? Will it be fine? Will it work out in the long run? And that is the essential question of romance. And look how many romances have been written on that single thing. So it's not like there's any shortage of possibilities in creating hooks. And that is a classic one that you'll find in all romances and lots of other places as well. This attraction issue between individuals.
And also one of the factors that play into the different romance novels, romantic comedies, whatever like that. There's always that secret that the one character is holding on to, and then it's a matter of like how is that secret going to come out, and that also keeps you going.
One of the things too, again, I want to change us going a little bit. We've been talking about beginnings. We've been talking about the initial hook. So the goal of every good writer is to be able to hook your reader from chapter to chapter to chapter. And it's repeating that ability to hook them into us. One of the things that I've noticed is, of course, you've got the cliffhanger. And cliffhangers can be overdone. I mean, to be honest. But the idea is to end the chapter with something that's going to be exciting, that's like a problem that's got to be resolved, hopefully, on the next chapter, unless the author changes locations, which sometimes annoys me, I'll be honest. And I have to go back, like, okay, where's it? Oh, now, 2 chapters later, okay, now I'm back into it. I think author Lindsay Davis does this quite well. I'm trying to remember which book this was, but one of my she has a sarcastic detective who I absolutely love, and Marcus Didius Falco is his name, and there's one part of this one mystery where he's talking to Vestal virgins about a murder that's occurred. And he takes a Vestal virgin, he's talking to her, if I remember how the scene goes, and I could be slightly wrong on timing, it's nighttime. And by the way, Vestal virgins are not supposed to have sex at all.
Hence Vestal virgin.
That's the term virgin. And by the way, Marcus Didius Falco is married, by FYI, at this point in time. So he's talking to her, and there's somebody who's going to be patrolling in the area. They hear somebody approaching. So they jump into a carrier. Think of a carriage, but it's carried between 4 people or 2 people.
A litter.
A litter. Thank you. I couldn't get the word out right. So when they're sitting there, all quiet. But as soon as that's the end of that chapter, they jump in. Next chapter. Is a 1-sentence chapter. I swear, nothing happened. Next chapter. I really do mean nothing happened. Next chapter. Go ahead.
It sounds like story questions continue to hook readers throughout the novel.
Yeah.
Because when they jump into the litter, you're like, will they get caught? And the next chapter doesn't answer that question. It just makes it more likely that something did happen because you don't trust the narrator.
Exactly.
So that's a great use of story questions to make the reader turn chapter after chapter. Nancy Kress, in her book Beginnings, Middles, and Ends, calls the first sentence, the last sentence, the first few paragraphs, the last few paragraphs of a story or of a chapter the power positions. They're what's going to hook the reader and what's going to make them want to keep turning the pages. They're what's going to stay with the reader when they have finished either the chapter or the story. So you want to make those really strong, and you want to make readers wonder and worry, as Frey said, at the end of the chapter, at the beginning of the next, so that those story questions will continue carrying them through your book.
I also want to recommend a book that I hold in very high regards. It's a book by a gentleman named Tom Pope, who wrote this book called Good Scripts, Bad Scripts. Mm-hmm. And what he does is he goes through 25 different scripts of varying quality and basically breaks them down as to, like why they worked or why they didn't. And one of the scripts that he covers is, I would have to say, is my favorite script for a film that I've seen. So, this is definitely right in my top 3 of favorite movies of all time, which is Network. Just a wonderful, wonderful film. And the main reason why it works, and Thomas Pope broke it down so well, is because every single scene in that movie either starts a new problem or addresses an existing problem. And it just keeps going and going and going, and it does nothing but keep you invested in every single second of that movie. Strong, strong recommendation. One of the strongest you'll ever hear from me. See the movie, read the book. It breaks it down in a really, really great way.
Well, we've talked a bit about story questions, but one of the things that will keep a reader invested in your story, will keep them turning pages, 3 of the things are tension, conflict, and stakes.
Can I add another one?
Sure.
Character interest is as well, but go ahead, keep going. I'll cover character interest. You got the top 3.
Oh.
That's fine. Then I'll cover character interest, and you do that.
No. Let me cover tension real quick, because I have a quote for this.
Good, I like that better.
This quote is from Writing the Breakout Novel Workbook. It's by Donald Mayes. And that's Maass, and I'm probably butchering the pronunciation.
Mas.
Like a house.
We just said 3 different ways of saying it in that 2 seconds.
Yes.
So,
by the way, just before she gets started, if you ever go to a writer's conference and he's there talking, It's
Donald.
worth it. It's
Just call
worth
him.
it.
I'm
It's
so
worth the
jealous.
cash.
I'm so jealous you've seen him talk.
I have seen. Actually, I saw him shut down a bunch of editors and publishers and other agents when he was talking. He was talking. Sorry, sidebar. He was talking about the future, where agents. He thinks agents should be going with how the entire publishing industry is going, and he threw a challenge out there, and you just saw their mouths go. They couldn't say anything. They didn't want to. They didn't even want to put themselves out there. Anyway,
All right. So, he writes a lot of books on writing breakout novels. So, he addresses tension in this workbook. He says, tension can be many things. It can be as obvious as a gun to the temple, or as subtle as forlorn hope. Even the mere anticipation of change is a kind of tension. It doesn't matter. Without tension, we have no reason to wonder how things will turn out. We have no reason to read the next line. We might at first, but before long we will begin to skim. Sooner or later we will set the novel down.
mm-hmm.
So,
Totally agree with him.
I'm sorry, I was totally skimming listening to that.
oh my goodness. Well, that's a good illustration then, Chanel. Just so
I'm
hateful
sorry.
today. So hateful today. Anyway, tension what makes your readers want to continue. It's again that question of what's going to happen and the worry that things might not happen as you think they should. And the anticipation of change is key. In that first sentence that I read you guys earlier, Linus meets his new stepmother for the first time. You know that his life is about to change, and you don't know what that change is going to look like. And that makes you wonder, makes you want to read more. Unless you're Chanel, whose face is making faces again.
Look, I make no apologies for my short attention span. It's just there.
What?
Wow. Damn it.
Well, so tension was one of the things you mentioned, and the other two were.
Conflict and stakes.
Yes, so let's talk about that.
Well, Chanel and I just had conflict, and that probably made you pay more attention to what was going to happen in this conversation. I'm just saying, we hone in on that. We like seeing things go down.
And conflict does not need to be battle scenes. I mean, going back to that, it's the entire. Well, now.
And see, Chanel just visually raised the stakes.
Yes.
She raised fisticuffs at me.
And that in the old 1880s style, not modern day.
Oh my goodness.
It was actually rather cute. I wish I had a video of it.
Oh my gosh. All I need is you in one of those powdered wigs, Chanel.
No, that's 1780s.
I don't know. The British still use them in court, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that would be
Which is why I could be a British attorney. But anyway. Which I know that's not their term.
Barrister.
I know. They have different levels.
So conflict is basically where your main character, usually something your main character wants, they are getting opposition about. So character wants to fall in love and be with their romance, their love interest in the romance story, but something is opposing them. The lover's family is disapproving, or
Our culture is different.
or they think they might be in love with Jack the Ripper, and so they have an internal struggle about can they love a murderer. It's all sorts of different kinds of conflict. There's external, there's internal, and what you do with both of those will play a large part in how you feel about the character, which David wanted to talk about.
Thank you. So, but before we do that, and before we go to character, let's do the other one, which is raising the stakes. I'm sorry, you
Gave
you
him a
hit
great
this perfect.
segue, and he was like, denied.
No, I'm going to deny it because we're going to get into character.
All
I
right.
forgot
But I
that you
ain't
were
talking
very
about raising
closely
the
related,
stakes.
though.
Okay,
Yeah.
a television show that I think did this really well.
Character or conflict?
Yes. And raising the stakes. And raising the stakes. And keeping tension.
That was a yes and answer to a
Yes.
which one
I'm throwing them
question.
all together. And by the way, before you get into television show, all Alfred Hitchcock movies are suspenseful, deal with this constantly. So, a couple of television shows that did it fantastically. One that made it constantly stale was 24. And the 24, guys, I'm not putting it down. It's just, it was formulaic in the sense of it. But if you watch the first two, at least.
Wait, hold on. When is it was formulaic ever a compliment? I just want to know this.
No, it's okay. Earl Stanley Gardner. I love his writing. He is formulaic. Unfortunately, because of him, I can see the formula in certain other writers, and I can't read them, and they are quite popular. I'm just saying it out there.
Well, formulas are comfortable, so
They
there
are. They're
is
easy
that
to
to
use.
say for it.
They're
You know,
easy
Formulas
to
are good.
use.
you're used
Formulaic.
to them, and so
Right.
it's a comfortable way to start.
Formulas.
Hopefully, you go somewhere else from there,
Right.
though.
Formulas are good. Formulaic, unkind.
Okay, but okay. 24, the television show.
Conflict
Before I
illustration.
get people writing me hate mail on that, it does several things. One, you get interesting characters. You get characters that you can get into their minds. They do things that may not be considered all that ethical. I'm thinking of Jack Bauer. But yet you can understand why he's doing it, because he's underneath all this heavy tension that something bad is about to happen. Nuclear bomb's about to blow up. President's about to get killed. Whatever that high tension stake is. He has a personal stake in this as well. Notice it's not just his plot stake of how do I avoid the president from being assassinated, just choosing one of them. But he's got an internal one. Maybe his daughter's in threat as well. Or he's got a friend who is, or a colleague, I'm not sure where he had friends, colleague that he respects a lot that's in threat. So you've got that aspect. Then, to ratchet up the tension, where of course the term name 24 comes from, you have a countdown clock of 24. 24 hours, so that's 24 episodes. That is constantly clicking away. Now, he doesn't see that, but you, the viewer, see it. And that clock, that countdown clock is constantly there. It's a reminder we're about to have trouble. Go ahead.
I have never seen 24, and
I can resolve that.
I have a question that's just for my personal curiosity.
Uh,
Are there any shows in the 24-hour timeline, because it does an hour each time, right?
Yep.
Yes.
Are there any shows in which Jack Bauer doesn't appear because he's asleep?
No, he's up for the full 24.
He takes like a 20-minute nap, or maybe even a 5-minute nap, falling asleep in his desk occasionally in like
Yeah.
one episode or two episodes.
People
See-
make bad decisions with sleep deprivation.
Yes, they do.
Yeah, and that's kind of shown in there.
Oh, wow. I'm glad he's helping our country.
Very well done. Go ahead.
Well, I think that we have, in many, especially crime dramas or crime books, that you will have a plot, a main plot, and a subplot. And
Yes.
the main plot in most mysteries is the mystery, that something bad happened and it has to be solved.
Right.
And the subplot is very often a much more personal thing. Take Janet Ivanovich, for example. She can always get a little mileage out of the sexual tension that Stephanie Plum has for Joe Morelli on the one hand and the hot ranger guy in black on the other. She can always get some sexual tension out of that, and if things start to lag, she can go to that plot. But then, of course, since it's a mystery, she has perhaps several other things that Stephanie Plum has to do, other bail bondsman issues that she must deal with. So I think that is a very typical thing that novelists are going to try to do. They will have a main thing, but you can't keep that impetus going on the main thing absolutely all the time. You may need to go to a different source of your tension from time to time and kind of, once again, ramp it up and then ramp it up and have this sexual tension or personal tension of some kind as an intermediary.
And that's great, because one of the things going back to character and to tension and formulaic, by the way, and where it is a compliment, I'm going to go to Alfred Hitchcock. Alfred Hitchcock. Different screenwriters on almost all his movies. That there was always a formula. And it makes it formulaic. And you're not going to see it right by looking at the words or listening to a dialogue or that, technically. The formulaic aspect was psychology and what would raise the stakes. Alfred Hitchcock used Freudian psychology. Whether or not you like Freud or not, I don't care. I'm talking about Hitchcock. I'm not talking about our personal choices.
It's just a cigar.
It's just a cigar.
Or the accuracy of Freud.
P.S. I swear nothing happened. I really swear nothing happened.
But anyway, you've got in Freudian psychology, you've got the id, the ego, and the superego. And what he does with these movies is he runs the stories through the id and the superego, with the ego trying to be in between. Now, for those who don't know Freud, I'm just going to do this very quickly. The id is the world of desire. The superego is the world of your, how should I say, you're a parent who likes to smack your hand when you do something wrong. And the ego is the one who's trying to balance between these two. You get the suspense of, I want to be with X. I can't be with X because of Y. And Z is sitting there going, but we've got to get to being with X. But yet Y is saying, no, how do I manage this? And you get symbolism and so forth thrown in there. It is a constant spider web between the two. Or I like to use rafters in a church. They have got to connect somewhere together to hold up the ceiling of the story.
I'm sorry, I thought you said raptors.
Well,
Raptors are really funny. I do like that
Raptors
image.
do work together, though, and you feel like you need a church when they attack.
And more like a graveyard.
Sanctuary.
Yes. But where I'm going with it, let me throw out Psycho. Psycho, you've got, I know it's been constantly talked about, but the main character is Norman Bates. It is not who we start off with viewing. In fact, there's a lot of symbolism where the woman played by Lee Scott,
Janet Leigh.
I'm trying to think of the. Thank you. I knew I had the wrong name. I can't think what her character's name was.
Marion Crane.
You see her in bed. She's wearing very risque at the time. She's wearing her bra. It's white. Eventually, she makes a decision to go with her super ego, which is stealing the money, and her clothing changes to black, including her bra changes to black. It's very symbolic of what's happening. Of course, she gets killed.
She goes with her id, not her superego. Her superego.
She goes with her ego. Super ego. You're right. With her id. Yes, I do know Freud. I'm just screwing up terms.
Mm-hmm.
But we get attention now. She's dead, so that character's not being followed. We get attention of, is Norman Bates going to get away with it? What's going on with Norman Bates? Did he really kill? Because it's supposedly his mother. And here you dive into psychology. Vertical's another one to look at. Or even better yet, where I broke my baby teeth, proverbially, on Alfred Hitchcock is Rear Window. Talk about id, ego, superego in constant conflict. And that constant conflict creates the tension. Since these movies have been out forever, will the lover of Jimmy Stewart's character be able to escape from the murderer being trapped inside the apartment? And all he can do is watch across the apartment complexes. Go ahead.
Alfred Hitchcock's core story, as far as I see them all, is that it's something that's going to bring tension from pretty much the first frame or the first word of it, because often what he does is have his character in over his head before he even knows it. Strangers on a Train
Love that one.
is a cue example. And The Man Who Knew Too Much, North by Northwest, all of these are characters going along just happily, and then boom, their world changes and they don't understand it, they can't do anything about it. This is a recipe for suspense that Alfred Hitchcock had down to a science.
And a lot of times that person whose world goes kaplooey on them is considered the wrong man. He's mistaken identity. Not always, but a lot of the movies is a completely mistaken identity of who they are. North by Northwest is a perfect example of that one.
And it's the perfect case of the reader or the watcher can really identify it because he's just an innocent guy going along and boom, he's in the center of it.
Yeah.
He never volunteered for this. Unlike Jack Bauer, who did volunteer for it.
Yes. So, we talked about a whole lot right there. Let's talk about problems and how
We didn't
that-
talk about
We didn't talk
raising
about
stakes.
Oh, we didn't talk about
We
raising.
talked about that.
I thought we did that with 24. I'm sorry.
Nope.
Not
with
really.
the clock going. Okay, so let's talk raising stakes. Go for it.
Stakes are basically, well, what is at stake in your story?
Mhm.
What do characters stand to lose if they don't succeed in what they're trying to do? So a lot of superhero movies will have the world is going to end because something will take it over or kill it all.
Explosions.
Yes. You have to save the world. That is what's at stake, the entire world and everyone in it.
And that's getting a little boring, frankly.
Yes, it is.
You can
It
have
can be.
Kind of
It
sad.
is.
But
You can
at the same time, though, like you're dealing with characters that are equipped to handle stakes like that. So like it's one of those things where the characters themselves raise the stakes just by being it. It's just like the end of Batman Begins, where James Gordon is talking about escalation, and he brings up the Joker.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's
They have
really like
Kevlar,
what
they,
those
They get
you know
armor-piercing rounds.
yeah.
You need to, well, one of the things that is a problem in a sense with superhero films and with series is that you have to keep topping yourself.
Yes.
And I
Yeah.
think what they're finding with a lot of the Marvel stakes right now in the cinematic universe is they've already saved the world. Like,
Twice.
Multiple times.
Oh,
What do you
many,
think?
many times.
like
Let me borrow for a
how
second.
do you save more than the world when you're only dealing with the world in the scope of your story?
So they put in more superheroes, but that just gets confusing if that's taken far
I'm
enough.
borrowing
Let's
from
see.
Stargate SG-1, the TV series, where Jack walks in and goes, "We just saved the world again. Don't let it get boring. Come celebrate with us." No. So go ahead, keep going.
I feel like that's one of those things where you, the scale of the disaster is moderated by the scale of the hero, because I mean you can't have these fantastical creatures and beings that have all this power and then they save the world and then it's like, oh no, what happens next? We're out of milk. Can't handle that.
Pepper!
Or the cat stuck in a tree. You want to handle that too? That'd be great. But
Although that would be a great inciting incident for you to be introduced to that hero.
but the one thing that I'm seeing is that the problem is that they keep by raising the stakes, people keep kind of augmenting their characters and forming them into this weird sort of power crazy chimera of nonsense, and we're at the point that they have to keep upping the stakes where it's like, okay, you saved the world, your character is all powerful, that's great, now can you go get some milk? So it's like this weird self-fulfilling prophecy or a cyclical thing where it's like your character's power gets greater, so the stakes have to get higher, so the character has to get greater, and it's
This is where I give a whole bunch of credit to the Marvel Cinematic Universe and Kevin Feige and everyone behind the scenes for being able to find a way to make that work, because you take their phase 1, which is basically just like introducing their characters, and then you basically just kind of have them build and build and build. You know they're building towards something, so it's obviously the big world-threatening battle with the first Avengers. And then you have them go their separate ways, and all of a sudden they're dealing with problems that are more personal, but at the same time they still have their own stakes and everything of what they're doing. So all of a sudden they're being taken on their own personal little ride in different ways. Like especially after you have like the big like raucous battle of the Avengers, all of a sudden you have Steve Rogers and Captain America: The Winter Soldier dealing with a political conspiracy that that undermines the very structure of the organization that he pledged to fight with. And then all of a sudden, like as it goes on and everything, then all of a sudden you have them coming together again for Age of Ultron, and then eventually you have something that literally breaks the whole group into two with Civil War. So they're finding ways to do that, like while at the same time using other movies to introduce other characters and see, we'll eventually see how they go into the fold. But at the same time, that in itself is raising the stakes, because they have to find ways to continually top themselves without getting too formulaic to a point where they are going to wind up basically losing people because they are telling the same thing over and over again. So that's their own struggle in that sense. I think they're pulling it off. And it's one of those things where it's just like if you just take each film as they are and everything and see the whole escalation, the drop, and everything, it becomes a great ride.
Right. Go ahead, and I'm going to use a different example. Go ahead.
Well, speaking of the MCU and the way they use the individual films as opposed to the group films to tell smaller stories, that's one of the reasons I love Iron Man 3.
Yes.
You've seen Tony Stark become Iron Man. The suit is what everybody knows. He's just a regular guy under there, but he's super smart, so he makes it work.
And a billionaire.
And a billionaire, playboy, philanthropist, whatever. Anyway,
Drunk.
so
Regular.
Yeah.
Totally regular.
So what they do with stakes in the third film, I absolutely love.
Mm-hmm.
They have Tony Stark, who is Iron Man, and they take away his home, his support system, his suits. Mm-hmm. He's just a guy with a thing in his chest that's gonna kill him eventually, because he's not gonna live forever.
And he's addicted to the Iron Man persona.
Yeah.
So they took Tony Stark and they took away Iron Man. Mm-hmm. So the stakes in that were, getting Pepper back, getting his girlfriend back. A, but B, personal stakes,
facing his own PTSD,
and facing himself and recognizing that he was Iron Man, not the suit.
Right.
Of course, so Tony Stark was out of the suit for a lot of the movie, and it was great. You got to see him as a human, it developed his character, and you still felt all the tension going on, and you still knew the stakes were high, even higher because he didn't have the suit. Of course, then at the end, they were like, well, we have to put in all the suits. We'll put in all the suits. We will make them into fireworks. And you're like, why'd you got to bring all that into this? But at the same time, Tony Stark was fighting without the suits for the most part.
Yeah.
And I felt more connected to him as a character because of that. And I loved that film.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to jump off of the MCU for a second. I'm actually going to jump into one of my two favorite books. It is Winds of War, War and Remembrance. And yes, fans, I know you've heard me talk about Herman Wouk before. Now, completely different, but it comes out of the character tension and raising the stakes. There's multiple characters in the story. This is World War II is happening, is starting, and eventually goes full blown. And the series ends after VJ Day, after we've dropped the nuclear bombs. So, actually the book starts before the invasion of Poland. So if you wanted to look up your history, you get your time period there. There are lots of characters in it, but I'm going to just talk about two of them, and that is Byron Henry and Natalie Jastrow. Byron Henry starts off as a wandering, if you will, kind of a wandering guy. He doesn't really have any focus in his life, and he ends up working for Natalie Jastrow's uncle, who is elderly and a supposedly fantastic author. And by the way, I just want to say a sidebar, I want to slap the living daylights out of that character. And I'll explain why in a second. And he falls in love with Natalie Jastrow. Natalie Jastrow is a Jew in Italy, where it's safer than Germany. And her uncle's a Jew and all this stuff as well. So, by the way, that time period, that wasn't, being Gentile and being Jew were not normally seen together as a romantic situation that you could get away with. What happens is, throughout the entire story, Byron gets pulled into, he follows Natalie through some things, including the bombing of Poland, because they go up for a wedding in the family. He's going up as her escort. And by the way, I should say, Natalie is theoretically engaged, she's involved with an American diplomat who won't marry her because, again, of what I mentioned about the political and race aspect. So there's a bombing in Poland, and they're caught up in the middle of it. Goes from there. Natalie refuses to leave Europe. She wants to leave Europe with the growing tensions, but she won't leave Europe because of the uncle who thinks they're going to be safe. And Byron, who gets pulled back into the military. He ends up getting over there. They end up getting married rather quickly. Natalie gets pregnant. He's still trying to get them out of Europe. They try to escape Europe themselves, and they get talked out of it. And we won't go. I'm trying not to ruin the books for you, but Natalie and her uncle try to escape. They get stopped. Long story short, they get thrown into a concentration. They get first thrown into the Jewish ghettos, and then into Auschwitz itself. And I'll go ahead and ruin this part. The uncle does get killed. Natalie has lost all aspects of where a child is. The child is thought to be safe, but also thought to be dead. Won't go into that whole story. And Byron is having to find his family throughout World War II. And by the way, this is happening in Europe. Guess where Byron's main theater of conflict is at? Theater of war is at? The Pacific. Way far away. And so I will say, he does find them. He does bring them all back together at the end. But the growing conflict of being separated like that in the middle of a chaotic war, which, by the way, nobody knew until later in the war that the Allies would even win, because at the beginning it looked like Nazi Germany was going to win. Mm-hmm. And you just create a massive character conflict, massive tension, as Byron's trying to do this. Natalie's going through the other thing, and she refuses to give up her uncle. And you just create the tension out of their own personal desires. So that's raising the stakes. I mean, you can't get too much higher than having be shoved into Auschwitz.
It's hard to get worse than Auschwitz.
So, speaking of people with problems, what about people with problems with their hooks? How do you fix problems with your hook? How do you even know you've got a good one?
What if you don't have one?
Or you don't think you have one.
Yeah.
Or what if you've got a great hook, but it doesn't really make readers feel like it's part of the same story as the rest of your book?
My answer to that, for what it's worth, is two things. One, you've got to develop an instinct. Now, that's hard to do at times. You developing your own instinct to realize whether or not you got your own great hook or not, and with that, you can be way the hell off base. Okay? I mean, I've got a great hook! Just listen to this! Oh, God. is the answer. Or vice versa. And I think that's where you rely on your beta readers as well as your critique groups. If you go to critique groups and you turn it over to them and you see what their reaction is.
You kind of already, said what I was about to say, but yeah, just definitely to add on to what we were talking about earlier. Like you said, the first draft is not where your hooks go. You save that for the second, third, fourth draft if necessary.
Seventh, yeah.
Whatever, however long it takes. But at the same time, your beta readers are going to figure it out because they're the ones that are going to be your first audience. They're the ones that are going to be the first ones to basically let you know whether they are drawn to keep on turning the pages or if they just have to out of necessity because they promised they would be beta readers for you.
Oh, yeah. I just wanted to bring up something for series writers and for people that are writing genres. Just to point out that what's a good hook depends on who your reader is. So particularly if series, a good hook for someone that's read the first book of your series might not hook a person that's picking up your book for the first time. So you need to, when you're doing your beta readers, you need to get at least a few beta readers that are your target audience. Namely, make sure they're your target audience, but haven't read your first book.
Yeah, because Stanley made a point to say that every comic is someone's first comic, so you always have to have just a little bit of information about your characters, so that way those kids that are or adults who are reading a comic for the first time, whether it's issue number 1 or issue number 100, they are not lost while they're reading. They're invested in what they're reading.
Because I was beta reading the second or third book of a series that I had no clue, and it was enough to be able to follow it. But they were referring to a character both by first and last name, and it took a couple of chapters before I realized they weren't talking about two separate people.
Oh.
Yeah. And that could be a trick. And I've actually heard the same advice directed for series writers and novels. I couldn't tell you who that gave it to me, but you need to remember that just because you might have 30 books out there, if it's all in the same series, Mr. Joe Blow or Miss Joe Blow, Jane Blow, will walk off into your bookstore and buy a book, and that could be dead center, or the last book you just wrote.
Yeah.
It gets them hooked, and they don't know squat about your story, about who these characters are.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, any final last thoughts? Yes.
I do. I have a final thought, and it comes from Parade Magazine, which was just out on February 5th of this year, and it's called 12 Ways to Think Faster. This is about making you smarter, folks, and it gives some of the usual advice, to stay curious and to stay on your feet when you work and all that kind of stuff that keeps blood going to your head or some such stuff. But one of the key things is, I think, perfect for writers. It's this. Researchers have found that good literary fiction improves connectivity and function in our brains and helps strengthen imagination too. So if you want to be smart, folks, read fiction.
Yes. Read, read, read. And on that note, we're going to say have a great week writing, and tune in next week for yet another interesting topic in the writing industry. Thank you for listening.
Did you know that Right Pack Radio has an international audience? How would you like to reach that audience in regards to your books, your book services, your author services, or more? Go to www.windingtrailsmedia.com and look under advertising for more information. If you don't have a script, that's not a problem. We will be happy to work with you. Once again, go to www.windingtrailsmedia.com for more information.
The new theme songs for Right Pack Radio were written and performed by Meredith Tate. All copyrights remain with her.